Good morning, Minister, Father, Carja. It's an honour and a privilege to be here this morning to open the launch of the Peter McVerry Trust report. I want to commend Peter and his team and his staff for the commitment and the services that they've done to people who are marginalised in this city. Without people like Peter and his team, people would be in a very sad and dark place. I've spoken to Peter many times. I see the work he does. I've asked him this morning if he would arrange for me to do a day tour of all his services and meet his staff and his clients in relation to progress being made. But I just want to send off this report with my blessing and my support, and I will continue to be a supporter of the McVerry Trust in the days and years and months ahead. It certainly has my blessings, and I wish everybody well in it. And I can't commend Peter McVerry enough for the work that he does. It's absolutely outstanding. It's work that a lot of people won't put their hands to. It's work that it's frontline stuff. It's real stuff. And I heard Peter this morning on Morning Ireland given a very simple way, and I know the Minister is here and I don't want to sound too political, a very simple way as to how we can reduce the housing and homeless crisis in the city. And that can be done. And I know the Minister has committed herself to the housing issue and the homeless issue. And I welcome that. So without further delay, you don't be listening to the Lord Mayor, you want to get on with the business of the day. I do have another commitment. Minister, I wish you well in your campaign for future leader of the Labour Party. And I'm sorry I couldn't facilitate your group in the Mansion House. It's under renovation. I'm told health and safety would prevent me from doing that. So look, thanks very much, Peter and your staff, for inviting me here. It's an honour and a privilege, and I wish everybody well and have a great day. And long may many reports like this be put into action, because that's what we need: action and funding.
Just to say a quick word about the report. It's difficult sometimes when you're in the middle of the work to talk about the previous year, but last year was a very significant year for us. We were 30 years as a trust, so 30 years working with some of the most vulnerable and marginalised in our society. It's a complete privilege to do that. We don't do it alone. We've 140 full-time staff and 60 part-time staff assisting us to do that. Last year we worked with 3,500 homeless people. Some of that is because there's been an increase in homelessness, but for us it was because we were out there operating and setting up new services. We're supported by a load of colleagues in the sector in doing that. We've got really good relationships with the local authorities that has seen the Trust operate emergency services in 3 of the 4 local authorities in Dublin. We're supported by the Dublin Region Homeless Executive, the HSE, particularly the social inclusion section in the HSE, the childcare departments, which are now under the Children and Family Agency. So there's a whole range of colleagues and partners that we work with in order to deliver and to do what we do. Last year, very big year for us, 30 years, as I said. Last year was the year that Peter was nominated by Dublin City Council to be the 77th Freeman of Dublin. That's a fantastic achievement for him. Brilliant for homeless people, he would say, because all his life has been working with homeless people, and the award is also for them. We've catalogued some of the growth and history of the Trust within the report. I won't bore you with it. It's all there, it's in the report. The main thing we want to take out of the report is that our work is exclusively with the most vulnerable and the most marginalised. We don't make bones about that. We're not doing it with all young people. We're doing it with as many as we can. Last year, as I said, 3,500 of those. We need to do more of that, and we need more support from all our colleagues to do that. Nobody wants to see a homeless person dying in the back of the Mater Hospital, as happened a couple of weeks ago. Not only is that shocking, what's more shocking about that is that he was missing for a week and nobody knew he was missing. So that's what the Trust, I mean, we could talk all day about the Trust, and I'm going to wind it up now, but that's what we're really trying to do. We're trying to open doors to the most vulnerable and the most marginalised and bring people in. so that less people on the edge all the time. We want more people into the centre. We wish the Minister well. Hopefully she will do well in the coming days and weeks, and we might be looking at the new Taoiseach, and I'll have had my photograph taken with the possible Taoiseach. Maybe will, maybe not, but either way she's going to be in government, and either way Labour have a role to play in that. We note that the Minister said this morning about the reintroduction of social housing. We need social housing. The Trust under the current Housing Minister has secured 2.4 million in the last number of weeks in capital funding. That's fantastic news. 24 new keys to 24 new doors, 24 homeless people out of homelessness forever. And we're delighted and excited about that. But we want to triple that. We want more of that. We need more of that. We need more of a housing build. We need more capital investment. And we need controls in the rented market, because we've been relying on the rented market. Last year, Minister, through the support of Carla Rourke in your department, we ran a pilot rent supplement scheme. I'm sure you referred to it. We had great support from your department in relation to that. That was led by the Dublin Homeless Executive, Regional Homeless Executive. And we housed 162 people with those increases in caps. This year, we're down to about, with the same support from your department, we're down to about 53 at the moment. We want to do more, but the private rented market is saturated at the moment. So, it's saturated with just the sheer volumes of people, and also with the rises in rents, people can go way above the rent caps, even above the extensions that your department has been able to offer. So we need a social housing build, and we need continued support from your department in relation to those schemes. I'm going to hand you over to the chairman of the Peter McVerry Trust. As I said, we've over 200 staff working with 3,500 people last year. But in order to do that effectively, we need a good functioning board that in the current schemes, with all that's gone on in some of the charities, ensuring that we've good regulation and good governance. So I'd like to call upon our chairman, Jim O'Higgins. Thanks.
Minister, public representatives, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming. I won't be long, it's one page, so I'll be very quick. First of all, it's an honour for us to have the Minister here, not because she is a Minister, but because she's a dedicated person in her office, bringing reform to a department that is mind-boggling in its complexities. She is a protector of citizens, and she endeavours also to restore the nobility to the profession of politics. It can be seen from the report the diversity of the work of the Trust, from shelter to progressing to self-sufficient living, and oftentimes from brokenness to a degree of healing and restoration of the right to dignity and self-esteem. We acknowledge the financial input of the state and local authorities and housing agency services. We acknowledge the strategic and imaginative contribution in the development of goals. You will have noted the calls for a national strategy made frequently by Peter, and we are conscious of the commitment of Minister Jan O'Sullivan and others to a plan, which, because of the dire crisis in housing, has now to be accelerated. We note the new bill on rent allowance and that funds will be passed direct to the landlord. We will see the decisions and indeed the discretion to rent allowance as passing to local authorities. The reaction to these proposals are at present ambiguous, and we'll have to wait and see. We would have to say that we would look forward to legislation on residential rent controls. We do not believe that there is any constitutional barrier to this now, and we do believe that in the hierarchy of rights subject to our laws, the right to a roof is superior to the right to property. In acknowledging the funding that the Trust gets in the forms of grants for, and for the most part in the provision of services, it must be realised that these funds are given to us for the most part by the state because the trust is a provider of services. In other words, it's not just a handout. Sometimes, even often, some organ of the state gets a prophetic admonition from our founder, Peter McVerry. The public service is big enough, broad enough, wise enough, and compassionate enough to take criticism on behalf of its citizens by someone who has no other motive than that of upholding human dignity. Dispensation of medicine is never palatable, so we do not intend to prevent our founder from dispensing his words, nor to tell him when to administer his compassionate potions. The Minister will appreciate, as a chartered accountant, that we are utterly compliant under Section 39 and our information is freely available to be seen by everybody. We wish to acknowledge all our wonderful donors, private, quiet and generous. We assure the Minister and all public bodies that our control and government issues are utterly up to date. This is a community of 200 workers and of the thousands of people who we serve, who are part of our community, the Peter McVerry Trust community. The workforce has been altruistic, tolerant, responsive to crisis, and patient in the economic climate, in the acceptance of wage strictures. Peter has said it many times that persons whom we serve teach him and not the other way around, and may we continue to be taught. It is a privilege to be associated with service to citizens. In recent years, we have taken to launching of an annual report. This is not just a glossy publication imitating some large, big PLC, which might squeeze in a column in its annual report on its business ethics. Peter McVerry Trust is ethics. Thank you.
I'm going to call on Peter now to say a few words in relation to the report. Peter, as you well know, is a long-time campaigner, 30 years with the Trust, about 40 years in the field of social justice. He recently got the Pride of Ireland and recently got the 77 Freemen of the City. So put it together for Peter. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody, and Minister, very welcome. To all those from the Trust staff and others in the Trust, you're all very welcome. And to those of you who have come here to support us, thank you very much for being here. I suppose the one thing we can all agree on is that there is a crisis. There is a housing crisis, a homeless crisis. And while it's very bland to say it, the reality is that the solution to homelessness is to give people a home. That is a daunting task, with about 100,000 on the social housing waiting list. To eliminate that list would require us to build 5,000 social housing units every year for 20 years. And that 5,000 social housing units would cost €1 billion at present prices. So the reality is hugely daunting and probably at this time in our finances, impossible to achieve. We are spending €10 million per week on rent supplements to private landlords, and that really is an awful waste of money. It is much cheaper to keep people in their own accommodation than it is to provide them with hostel accommodation. If you put 10 people into a hostel, it's going to cost in the region of €30,000 per year to keep that person in a hostel. Whereas if you put 10 people into their own homes, you can have whatever level of support. You can have one staff person supporting 10 people at a cost maybe of 50 or 60,000 euros a year. So I think the need to, and I'm delighted to hear Minister talking about the need for social housing, because I think it's the first time in many years I've heard a government minister talking about social housing and the need for social housing. It's been the elephant in the room for a long time. The solution to homelessness is housing, but we have avoided the whole issue of social housing. I think today there is one thing that is utterly unacceptable even today, and that is that people have to sleep rough. In Ireland in 2014, it is appalling and scandalous that we cannot give every person a bed for the night with a roof over their head. It's not going to break the budget. It is not rocket science. That is something that could be done certainly by the end of the month, if at least the end of next month. I think that is an urgent need and a need that jumps out at us, because the numbers sleeping rough are going up and up and up. Second issue I would have is the quality of beds. That many of the emergency beds are of appalling quality. Biggest complaint I get from homeless people coming in to me is that they were in a hostel, they shared a room with 4 or 5 other people, they woke up in the morning, their other residents were gone, so was their money, so was their methadone, so was their mobile phone and everything else they possessed. For many people, going into emergency dormitory type accommodation is not safe and is not appropriate. I just had a lad in this morning with me before I came here, and he has come off drugs and he's looking for accommodation. He said, I was offered a bed in a dormitory full of drug users. He has chosen to sleep rough because he thinks that's a safer option for him. He said, if I go into one of those emergency beds, I'll be back on drugs in no time. What do they want me to do? Do they want me to go back on drugs? So I think we need to address the quality of emergency accommodation. And again, that's not rocket science. And again, that won't break the bank. But if we can't do those two things fairly quickly, what hope have we of the more difficult and the more expensive option of trying to provide homes for people? In praise, the homeless implementation plan I welcome very much. Taking the local authority empty units back into circulation, and I understand that all the Dublin City Council empty units will be back in circulation by the end of this year, and using whatever NAMA can provide will make a difference. And in reality, that could go a long way towards solving the long-term homeless situation. But my criticism of the plan is that, as the ad says, once those units are gone, they're definitely gone. And there are more homeless people coming down the road. And between now and the end of 2016, there will be a lot of people, new people will have become homeless. And there is no plan to deal with that. There is no plan for ongoing supply of housing to accommodate those who are coming down the road. And so my prediction, if the homeless implementation plan is implemented, and that's a big if, but if it is implemented, there could be more homeless people and more people sleeping rough by the end of 2016 than we have today. I welcome also the housing assistance scheme, whereby the local authority will pay the landlord. That could have made a huge difference 4 or 5 years ago. Really could have. Today it's too late. It is too late in the short term, because the demand for renting accommodation is far outstripping supply. And so it's not. But the one criticism I do have of that is that the section in that bill which says that those who are in private rented accommodation getting this housing assistance scheme are deemed to be in social housing. I think that is a disaster. And it may well be that the next count of the next assessment of housing need will show a drop, perhaps a substantial drop, in the number of households who are in need of social housing. And that drop will be caused not because the reality on the ground has changed, but because those who have moved into private rented under the Housing Assistance Scheme will have been deleted from the housing, the social housing list. The Minister has said that they can go on for transfers. They can still be eligible for transfers into social housing, but that is hopelessly fantasy. Who is going to transfer with them? Who's going to leave the security of tenure that you have in a local authority house to move into the insecurity of tenure in private rented accommodation? So the idea of transferring from rented accommodation into social housing is pure fantasy land. As already been mentioned, we would support the regulation of the private rented sector. Since the private rented sector is the dominant housing option at the moment for homeless people, the housing rented sector is a market sector. The markets can work very well, sometimes, for people who have the money to be able to afford to buy what the market is trying to sell. But the markets never work well for poor people who don't have the money. And so the private rented sector, it's a market sector, and it is currently failing poor people and homeless people. So we need to regulate that sector. I'm certainly in favour of rent regulation, as there is in other countries, a rent regulation which is suitable both for the landlord and for the tenant. And I would also support regulation around rent which gives people security of tenure. People need to know, and particularly people with children, need to know that they can live here for the next 4 or 5 years at a minimum. The moment they don't have that, the moment they can be evicted even at very, very short notice in certain circumstances. And that insecurity of tenure is a huge drawback in recommending private rented sector to homeless people. Housing is the most fundamental right of all, in my view. There are 5 basic rights: the right to health, the right to education, the right to work, the right to adequate food, and the right to a home. But for me, the right to a home is the most fundamental, because if you don't have a suitable home, it's virtually impossible to access education. It's virtually impossible to access work. Your health is certainly going to deteriorate, and you're not going to eat properly. So all the other basic rights depend on having the right to a home. Constitutional referendum, the group that came together to look at the Constitution recommended that the right to housing would be inserted into the Constitution. I think that would be a huge step forward. What made the difference, and I'll finish here, what made the difference with children who are homeless? When I started, I brought several children to the HSE, or the health boards as it was then, who are homeless, some of them living on the street, some of them engaged in very risky behaviour to feed themselves, and the health boards didn't want to know. And what made the difference was the Childcare Act of 1991. And that gave homeless children a right to a home, to a suitable place to live. And if they didn't get that right provided to them, they could go to the High Court. And about 100 children beat a pass to the High Court. And the High Court forced the health boards and the government at the time to invest in childcare services, to ensure that every child had a suitable place to live. It was giving children a right to suitable accommodation that made the difference. I think we will always have homelessness unless we can insert in our constitution or our legislation the right to a home. If we could do that, then then homelessness would be solved at considerable expense, I admit, but homelessness would be solved in a relatively short period of time. So I'm very happy to be here today. 30 years we have been working with homeless people. It's been a wonderful 30 years. I've talked about that before. I have learned so much. I have gained so much from working with homeless people. As Pat says, as Jim says, they have taught me so very, very much about myself, about Ireland and Irish society. I have learned just so much from them. And so I want to thank them. thank them for what I have learned from them. And as Pat says, any other awards that I get are given to me, I think, for homeless people. It is your award rather than my award. So hopefully in the future we can eliminate homelessness, certainly reduce homelessness in the short term, and provide a better future for all those who are currently without that future. Thank you very much indeed.
The Trust works with some of the most vulnerable, those who we work with. Other organs of the state, other parts of their life have let them down, failed, whatever. Early school leaving is a part of a lot of our histories of our children that come into the Trust. So the Trust is kind of working with homelessness, and homelessness is almost a symbol of what's not working elsewhere. The reason why we asked Minister Joan Burton is because her Department of Social Welfare, it also picks up on other areas where the state has not worked or couldn't work or couldn't deliver for particular citizens. So we asked her to come in today. We're delighted to have her here. So I'd like you to put your hands together for Minister Joan Burton. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Pat, for the invitation, and I'm very honoured to be here. I have always thought that one of the hallmarks of Peter McVerry's approach, and indeed of the Trust's approach to homelessness, is the belief that homelessness is a social justice issue which has to be addressed as a part of a wider government policy to tackle poverty. Where I went to school in the city centre, one of the people who worked with people like me when I was in school was Sister Stan, and that was a great privilege and a great insight very early on into issues at a time when in Dublin, and even looking out at the nice houses we're looking at here, huge numbers of people, huge numbers of the population lived in rented homes, and that was a very usual thing, and there was some security of tenure and levels of rent guidance and rent control, and that certainly is something that we need to learn from some of the positive experiences in Irish history of what has worked and what has given difficulties. Homelessness is one of the most visible and distressing signs of the social impact of the crisis that has hit Ireland since 2008. It's also a stark reminder of the major challenges for Irish society in tackling poverty. Reducing and ultimately eliminating poverty is a fundamental commitment of the government, and in 2012 the government revised and enhanced the National Social Target for Poverty Reduction, and the revised target is to reduce consistent poverty to 4% by 2016, and to have that again by 2020. The government has also agreed to sub-target the issue of children affected by poverty. So a key policy response to poverty is our social welfare system. Last year, the Department of Social Protection published an ERSI study which examined the performance of the welfare system and other social transfers in cushioning people from the worst effects of rising unemployment and falling incomes. The findings about Ireland are unambiguous. Social transfers reduced the risk of poverty from over 50% to 16% in 2012. So in technical analytical language, this means that the poverty reduction effect of social welfare is about 71%. So in other words, 7 people out of every 10 are lifted away from being at risk of poverty by social transfers. And the report shows that Ireland is top of the range of the EU 15, that's the wealthier countries by and large in the EU, in the effectiveness of social transfers in reducing poverty. It also means, as I've often said, that if you looked at it maybe from an economic or business point of view, that social welfare spend into the economy is by and large spent by people in shops and services right throughout the country. Obviously, the bulk of social welfare spending is to people like retired people and widows, and also a considerable slice goes on child benefit. We tend to think of most social welfare as being payments to people who are unemployed. That's not actually true. Most of it, actually goes to people like retired people. So the welfare system, the social welfare system, is playing a key role in alleviating poverty in Ireland. And this reflects concerted state intervention and investment in the social protection system. And even though it came under, I would say, exceptional scrutiny by the people from the Troika, we still have a very, very strong and a very important social protection system in this country. Now, obviously, some of the adjustments we had to make were very, very difficult. But what we have tried to do is to protect, as I've said on a number of occasions, is to protect the core weekly payments. Because at the start of the crisis, with the exception of people on pensions, the weekly payments were by and large reduced by a total of €1640 a week. And that was a very large chunk out of somebody's weekly payment that they would depend on to plan their expenditure and how to meet their different commitments. So the other issue, of course, in terms of the cause of poverty in Ireland over the last period of time has been the fact that after the crisis hit in 2008, 300,000 people lost their jobs over the next 3 years. And joblessness and the loss of a job or the loss of a business is a massive cause of poverty, both for the people who've lost the job, but also in terms of the economic activity that simply dies, in terms of people who are busy, who are getting up, going out to work, people who are running businesses and so on. I just want to say this in the context of HAP. The critical problem around the rent supplement, and by the way, as we speak, there's about 75 to 77,000 people at any one time on rent supplement in Ireland. From about the 2000s, it became the go-to in terms of people who had an accommodation need. And at that time, for a variety of reasons, including the fact that people at the time were very critical of, say, large estates of only social houses, and rightly so, there was a falling away from the traditional model of social housing in this country. It's been documented by a lot of researchers, and a turn to private rented accommodation. And the reality is that a lot of people interested in renting with income support from the Department of Social Protection actually liked that because it allowed them more choice, particularly for families, about the areas that they might go to and that they mightn't be part of a very large, exclusively social housing development. And, you know, as we look, and I think we should, to reinvest as a country, as a society, in social housing, we do have to be aware of the downsides of excessive concentrations. And, you know, again, during the boom, I know a lot of people here have a lot of experience of housing. While there were social housing clauses in developments, very often the social housing could have been 10 miles away from, let's say, the more upmarket development, some of which was designated to be as social housing. So I think we have to reflect on those lessons, but I do think very strongly, particularly for families with children, when they hit their 30s and 40s and they've small children, or earlier, depending what age people have children at, but nowadays a lot of people have children in their sort of early 30s onwards. People do need security of tenure. That is an absolute issue, in the sense that it's very difficult, even with good landlords, And a lot of landlords are actually good landlords and quite efficient business people. They're going to make a profit out of it, and they will treat their tenants fairly. But nonetheless, as people's families settle, they want to have security. And that generally means not having to go back to the private rental market. And after, in some cases nowadays, 1 year, in other cases maybe after 3 to 5 years, to have to search again for appropriate accommodation for what is now a growing family with an attachment to local schools and so on. So it's very much a complex problem, and it's one that, with a commitment to reinvesting in social housing, which is a very big capital investment programme, I believe that over a period of time we can make a very significant difference. Let me say as well that it makes a lot of economic sense, just wearing an economic hat for a moment, because I'm very conscious that in terms of the live register, there are about 80,000 unemployed construction workers on the live register. So in a certain sense, you have unemployed construction workers who by and large would love to get back to work, and on the other hand you have a housing need. Now, if we can have an investment package for Ireland which brings those two together, you're actually creating what perhaps, I don't know, would the Jesuits say a virtuous cycle or a virtuous circle? You put unemployed construction workers back to work, and you provide homes for families who need the homes. And that's just, a practical business and economic proposition, which I think a lot of people in government are convinced of. I think more importantly as well, from an Irish point of view, is it possible? Well, the answer is that the economy in Ireland is now in a better place than it was 3 years ago, or even 6 years ago at the height of the crisis, when a lot of things fell apart. And obviously in this government we've been picking up a lot of those different pieces to try and put people, businesses back to work, back to businesses being regenerated. And I don't want to go into all of the different difficulties, but we are now in a modest recovery position. And that's very important, because it means that as a government, internationally, Ireland can now borrow at very cheap rates compared to German rates. At the height of the crisis, we couldn't borrow at all, and that's why the IMF or the Troika came in and effectively took over or dictated the economic management of the country. We're in a better place now, so the context is different. But more importantly, this week in Europe, there's an important meeting of heads of government, and the Party of European Socialists, to which my own party, the Labour Party, belongs, they've had a number of meetings in recent weeks to basically set out demands around a new investment structure for Europe, because even countries like Germany need to invest in infrastructure. And as Father Peter has said, housing infrastructure is fundamental to people's quality of life, to achieving people's goals and aspirations of being able to live independently, to get a job, and where there's support from the state, that's at appropriate times and at appropriate levels. So I think that there is a possibility now, as we head into a new phase of European economic development, to have serious public investment programmes sponsored in part or facilitated in part by the sheer financial strength and power of the European Union. At the moment, there's a capacity for Ireland to borrow from the European Investment Bank, but some of the conditionality and the interest charges and costs of that can be very high. So I welcome the move in Europe, and I hope it has a good outcome at the meeting of the heads of government this week. It's not just about, a lot of the focus in the media is about the election of people to different jobs, and obviously I'm pursuing a particular job at the moment as well. So, if you like, talks of elections and appointments of commission heads and so on are in the air. But what it's about is that Europe now has the space to go back to an earlier European model, which was an acceptance and a recognition of the significance of broad social investment in economies, particularly where you have a demographic of a lot of young people, or indeed a lot of older people, and you need investment in housing, in education, in health, and in other services. And that in turn, if you generate that, puts people back to work. And again, it's a virtuous cycle of investment. And I think that that opportunity is now available within Europe, and it's now available potentially for Ireland. And certainly, in terms of the discussions in government that have gone on, Jan O'Sullivan has, as Peter and Pat have acknowledged, she has made a very, very strong case in government for an appropriate investment into housing and, in fact, to bring that forward. Also, the policy in relation to tenancies that become vacant, where, you know, it upsets me deeply, I have to say, at a personal level, to pass a house that's boarded up, when in fact, with a quicker turnaround and approach, a family could get that house or get that apartment. Now, the numbers involved in terms of the scale are not huge, but it's important because they're there and they can be brought into use quite quickly. Similarly, with NAMA properties, we have to again, and maybe in terms of county managers, we have to get perhaps the people who work in the councils, in the housing departments, to accept that they are going to have a really important, critical role to play in helping to get a significant number of people housed. On the HAP and on the other items, I would just like to say one final point in relation to the housing assistance payment. Of the 77,000 people who are on a rent allowance, about 30,000 plus of those are in the Dublin area. And the critical problem, again, for a family where the parents or parent are in their 30s, in their 40s, the problem with rent supplement is that, good and all as it can be, it also constitutes an employment trap. So that if you seek to get a job, which once people get settled in accommodation is very often at the very top of their priority list for improving their family income, you immediately come up against the barrier that with rent supplement, which was designed to be temporary, for the kind of cases that Peter was talking about, where people come into an extreme situation and with help and over a period of time that can be sorted. But with an individual who wants to work, they have a problem that if they go to work, they lose the housing supplement. They lose the rent supplement. Now, with the new system of working through the local authorities, in effect, they will have security of tenure via the HAP, and they will be on a differential rent, so that if in fact they take a job, as people do with differential rents, they can calculate how much extra will they have to pay in rent, but they will be able to secure and maintain the tenancy. And that really is a very important issue, particularly for families. It's not an issue for all 77,000 people. The other thing I want to say as well, in terms of the work of the Trust and the homes that they have provided to people, I do think that housing associations and organisations like the Trust also have a critical role in providing accommodation. It could be for particular groups of people who have a specific need, as in the work of the Trust, or it could be for organisations dealing with people perhaps in different age groups. But certainly, again, that partnership between the voluntary housing sector and local authorities and government is really important. And finally, we have just begun the formal protocol between the Department of Social Protection, the threshold, and the local authorities, particularly in the Dublin area, to in fact, if you like, anticipate families who are, particularly families again with children, who may be coming into difficulty where they're in danger of losing their accommodation, and taking, if you like, an early action to try and cut across that problem. And so far, and it's a relatively small number of cases, as you'll appreciate, the feedback on it is quite positive. And I want to end by saying that the staff in the Department of Social Protection, and I want to thank Pat and indeed Peter for their comments, really do and are prepared to go the extra mile to help as much as possible in relation to difficult cases. I suppose that the current focus in terms of families with children has to be the critical focus. But again, we're very happy to work with and to complement the work being done both by local authorities, but particularly the work being done by organisations like the McVerry Trust. And again, you know, some of the difficulties which arose before when housing situations were difficult in Dublin, they're not there at the moment because we have a lot of sites in Dublin which are not developed because of the collapse. There's a lot of possibility. It still takes time, obviously, to build a house, and there's a lot of people in this room who know, you know, that it's quite a length of time. But nonetheless, once we get started, we deal with the vacancies that come up, we deal with the NAMA houses. Each will produce a source of vacancies, as well as the work being done by the voluntary associations. And there's no one, if you like, magic fix that's going to address everybody's problem. But I think bringing them all together, as has been done in the strategy, I think can produce a very significant response over a period of time. Thank you very much.